Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. President Trump's first week back in office has been great. He's been great on immigration, securing the border, he's deporting illegals, ending birthright citizenship. Granted, that one will take a court fight. I want to say something on that real quick. You know, if you bother to read the history of that amendment, it's blatantly clear that it was not, oh, if you're born here, you're a citizen. He's absolutely right that is not the correct interpretation of it. And it's never been the correct interpretation of it. But for all these years, we've allowed that to stand, and that's ridiculous. So I'm glad that, he made that, gave that executive order, and so now there will be a court fight. But I would encourage you, go back and read the record. You can read the record from the 39th Congress. Senator Jacob Howard is the one who was the Senate sponsor. And if you just go look it up about the 14th Amendment and the sponsors, you read through there, it will lay out that was not the intent. It makes it clear that it was primarily about the newly freed slaves. Now, they did use the word person, all persons rather than just newly freed slaves or former slaves, but the questions are brought up, the specific questions about who this applied to. And it's clear, subject to the jurisdiction of, excludes illegal aliens, foreigners, just like it excludes the children of diplomats or ambassadors. But it's there. Now, this is a fight we should have had a long time ago. We would not be in the mess we're in if somebody in the past had the backbone to challenge this. So I really appreciate him doing that. Like I said, deportations are in full swing. He wants $1,200 a month. I think $1,200, maybe $1,200 a week, I think it is. So, that is doing great. Ending DEI. That is absolutely great that he's ending that. It's going to take a while to weed it all out. And, they're going to drag their feet, but he's serious about it, and that's very important. There's no way that you can stay together as a country and have that kind of garbage going on. He's calling out the left on everything. Firing people. There's so many more that need to be fired, but he's got a good start. He's dealing with the disaster relief. He's going to use our own natural resources, drill baby drill. He's basically doing what he promised to do, and it's been great for this first week. It's amazing. This has probably got to be one of the most productive weeks in our country's history, especially for any first-term president. I can't imagine there's anybody that accomplished more than this in a week. Well, let me back up. Actually, Biden did, but it was to destroy the country. All right. So a lot of what President Trump is doing now is trying to restore the country, and so it's great. It's great to see it, and I just hope that it keeps happening. And it's going to be harder as far as getting legislation passed because we do have narrow margins in the House and the Senate, and they're going to do everything they can to undermine it. But, I think most people are supporting what he's doing. And he said he was going to do it, and that's what he's trying to do. So great week, and just looking forward. Can't wait till more people get in position and things get really rolling. It's going to be great. So. Now, that doesn't mean we don't still have things to be concerned about in our states, all right? Immigration is one of those things that we're going to have to help him enforce. Our state and every other state's going to have to do that. And so don't think that he can do it all, but really great start for the first week. He did things and has done things this week and set things in motion this week that I never anticipated that he would do, or certainly not do right off the bat, but it's just great. Anyway, like I said, all the people at all levels have to stay involved on this. We need to be involved, alert, informed. Our guest tonight is definitely involved, alert, and informed. Danielle Goodrich with East Tennessee Freedom is with us tonight, and we're going to talk about the weather modification, that is, among other things. Thanks for coming on the show. Before we get to our main topic tonight, Danielle, let's talk some about the special session in Vouchers.
Hey, Dave. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate what you do. Now, I know that you homeschool, correct?
So no, I actually have kids who are in private school. They go to a private Christian school in
Okay.
Johnson City. So yeah, I'm pushing back on this pretty hard because we escaped as Vadi Bakum says, he says, we need to stop taking our kids to Caesar and being surprised when we get back a Roman. And so I took my kids out of, Caesar's grasp, and now we have Bill Lee, who is Caesar, effectively.
Yep.
He's from the government saying he's going to help, the 9 most dangerous words in the English language.
Yep.
And he's dangling a carrot and telling us there's not strings attached, but we know there are because a lot of us have read the legislation. And so for those of us who've gotten away from Caesar, we don't want Caesar anywhere near our kids. And mine are at private school. I don't want Bill Lee's Lizette Gonzalez in the private schools. And a lot of us, we watched the hearings last legislative session. We watched when Todd Warner was asking Lizette, how is this going to fix public schools? And she said it's not. Public schools are fine. And then she was bragging about wanting to have ample communications with private schools. And we're like, we don't want her having ample communications with our private schools. I mean, we know her background. It's DEI, it's woke, just like Penny Schwinn, which unfortunately Donald Trump just dropped as the deputy education secretary. I mean, we've been trying to write about that. Anybody who has a contact with Donald Trump, tell him that's bad news.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I meant to bring. We should all. I would encourage everybody to contact Senator Blackburn and Senator Haggerty and say, look, I don't know who President Trump is listening to about Penny Schwinn, but they are giving him bad advice, and she does not need to be approved. I really don't know who he's listening to. That is probably one of the worst appointments that he's even thought of. And
and he called her Peggy. He said obviously he doesn't know her personally. He doesn't really know her that well. So whoever gave him the advice to take on Penny Schwinn in education on the federal level needs to be fired.
Absolutely. So that's the only thing we can do on that, unless you have a contact with President Trump, is contact our senators and say, hey, look, do not approve her, and let the president know. Both Haggerty and Blackburn have some level of a relationship with Trump. They can let him know, hey, bad choice there. Let's move on to somebody else. So.
And so if Lee wanted conservatives like us on board with his next education commissioner pick, who's Lizette Gonzalez, maybe he should have picked somebody that didn't have a DEI woke background like she does. And it came out in the hearings last legislative session. I mean, it looked like an equity initiative. And I mean, for them to initially get into this conversation saying, school choice, it's going to make through free market competition, it's going to make the public schools better. And then to have her sit up there and say, public schools are fine. This isn't going to do anything for the public schools. This is about me getting my foot in the door to private schools. And so us mamas who got our kids out once we saw what was going on with COVID, we don't want Lizette Gonzalez in the schools. We don't want Bill Lee we don't want the government in the schools.
Okay. And we have a one-sheet summary on the voucher, if we pop it up there.
Yeah, so we East Tennessee Freedom, my group, so our mission is to uphold God-given rights through education and advocacy, and our motto is John 8:32, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So there wasn't really a one sheet at the time, so I put this together. I'm no graphic designer by any means, but I just wanted to show some of the quick points here. And so at this time, when we were first talking about this, you had the big Congress omnibus appropriations bill that had all this pork in it. And you had Thomas Massey who was saying, this is what happens. They put, all this pork and then they shove it through. And then you have Bill Lee who comes along and he put pork in this legislation. So we pointed to vouchers being a Trojan horse. We pointed to, if you scroll down, if you go to the legislation, and if you go to capital.tn.gov and you go to, it's HB 6004, SB 6001, and if you scroll down to the second to last page and to the last page, you will see the pork that's in there. So you're going to see it in there. There's $2,000 public school teacher bonuses, which are not based on performance. It's a bribe.
Yep.
They're just, rolling it in there. And what does giving public school teachers bonuses have to do with vouchers? And then if you scroll down to the next page, it talks, they even have Helene relief funds in there. If you look at the two last sections that I've highlighted. And so that's pork that's in there. And if you ask the governor's office, they're telling everybody right now that they're completely separate issues. But it says in there disaster relief funds, essentially. And so that section shouldn't even be in there. And then they also put a bribe in there for the commissioners. So they're like, oh, we know the school boards don't like this, but maybe they'll like the $2,000 bribes. We know the commissioners don't like this, but maybe they'll like having some infrastructure money to repair their public schools in there. And so, there's pork in this legislation. And I would also ask, what's the constitutionality of this? Because we're a one issue legislation state, and they're cramming Helene relief funds in here, and they're putting things in for, public school infrastructure into this voucher legislation. So we pointed to that. And then we also pointed to, that there are going to be strings attached. And it's funny, people will argue online. They'll say, well, look at the autonomy section. There's an autonomy section that says, in there, it says, we're going to let these private schools have autonomy. We're not going to be regulating them. But if you read the section prior to that, that's where all the strings are, because they're talking about how they're going to be involved in the enrollment process, in the application process. They're talking about how they're going to now have to take tests. So you're talking about now having to take government testing. And then it also talks about having to report the testing results. So those are three different ways that you've now just involved the state and people like Lizette Gonzalez into the private schools. Those are the strengths.
Clarify a couple of things here. Now, I understand that there was a bill ready for the regular session, but the bill for the special session, I guess, has some differences. The one you just showed, that's for the special session, correct?
This is for the special session. So they didn't take out the $2,000 teacher bonuses. They didn't take out the infrastructure. They didn't take out a lot of what was in there. It's almost identical.
Yeah. Now the other problem, and you kind of mentioned this a minute ago, but all right, so we're having a special session. The main topic listed for the special session was the vouchers, but we're going to deal with the disaster situation, disaster relief for East Tennessee. Now, I understood that to be a separate bill. So I guess maybe there's some in the education bill or in the voucher bill, and then I suppose there'll be a separate one, and then there's going to be one having to do with immigration, basically how to help facilitate the Trump administration within Tennessee in terms of dealing with the illegals, helping round them up, so on and so forth. I would have no problem. First off, the special session for disaster relief, the disaster was in September.
Yeah.
So we should have already had a special session for that. Now, that's not to say that they wouldn't need, there wouldn't have been other needs discovered by now, or that, hey, we need to do more. And I can understand that. Certainly no issues with that, with our state taking care of the people in our state. And even dealing with the immigration issue, although, our state has not been, they've been pretty pro-illegal. I don't care what they say. Our state government has been pretty pro. Not everybody, but there's a lot of things they could have done in the past to crack down on at least not magnetize our state so much. But now they act like they're hardcore and all on board and have just been waiting for this minute. In any event, it's going to cost some money. I think that certainly could have been taken care of in the regular session. It could be front loaded. If they wanted to do it, if the governor wanted to do it, they'd put the word out, and that could just be the first thing that got through the House and the Senate, and it would take effect immediately. I mean, they have already the funds on hand to do that. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. We'll get to that here in just a second. But it's ridiculous that he would put something like vouchers in a special session, because if you look in the state constitution, He's supposed to call these for extraordinary circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Just because he wants vouchers, that's not an extraordinary circumstance. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's using it as bribes. It was like the bribes in the separate legislation weren't enough. So it's not enough that we have $2,000 teacher bonuses in there, or for infrastructure for the schools, or even the section that says, if there's some disaster, that there's going to be funding for that. That wasn't enough. Now we have to add on top of that, immigration. And now we have to add on top of that, like, I'm glad that he's going to actually address the Helene hurricane relief, and that he's going to do a separate piece of legislation for that. But like you said, he should have done that months ago. There's people that's in my area of Northeast Tennessee. The devastation is, it looks like a war zone. In North Carolina, similarly, it looks like a war zone. And you're going to wait a couple months while people are freezing to use that to drive the vouchers through. And I think a lot of people see this for what it is, that it is being used in that way. And I think it cheapens it, but do I think ultimately that it's going to get pushed through? I do, unfortunately. I mean, I'm going to pray about it and hope that we can get the word out there. But I think a lot of the bullying that's going on in the legislature right now, holding chairmanships hostage, and all the other exchanges that are going on. I look at that and I think, if they can use bullying to get something through like this, why couldn't they have used that same pressure to just change the public schools anyhow? Like, change the curriculum in the public schools, cut the ties to the DOE. Yeah. They could have already done a lot of these things. The Tennessee legislature should have to focus on fixing the public schools that they're already over, rather than meddling in the private schools. And if they can't, then they can't promise that they're not going to break the private schools with the same regulatory burden that they broke the public schools with. And I use that example a lot. So I'll say the example of it. It's like the government who's over the post office, and they're saying everyone deserves equitable delivery services. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to start funding private FedEx. And then before long, FedEx has the same regulatory burden and the same culture as the post office. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And then if you look at it like this, you have the government who is over this product, and they're saying, well, we can't turn out a good product. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to fund our customers to go over to this private product. Right. But as a condition, we're going to regulate it. We can't compete with them, but we think somehow that we should be able to regulate them. That makes no sense. If you can't compete with it, why should you be able to regulate it? And, we point to that. And, you also have the history of vouchers is really relevant, because these aren't new. There's an excellent document on our website. If you go to easttanfreedom.com and you go to our resources page, and you scroll down on that page, there's shekels for shackles, and it talks about the strings of school choice. And it talks about what happened in Sweden. It talks about what happened in Canada. So in Canada's Alberta province, which is conservative, it's like the Texas of the United States. And at this point, basically all of the private schools in Canada were accepting government funding. They were given a choice: stop teaching God, stop being Christian, or lose your funding. And at this point, all the schools in the Alberta province were receiving funding. So, it's the same strings that we saw pulled with COVID. Yep. You had this unconstitutional federal mandate where the Supreme Court ruled correctly on the OSHA mandate, and they said the federal government can't broadly mandate on people. But then they ruled incorrectly on the CMS mandate, on the Medicare mandate, and they used precedent. They're like, oh, well, we've been regulating the lives of healthcare workers for a long time, so we're just going to continue to do that. And then in the states, they held the Medicare funding hostage for compliance to that vaccine mandate, where they said, well, the hospitals have to do this. They have to comply, or they're not going to get their Medicare funding. And therefore they did. And that's the same type of thing that's going on with this. Once they get that federal funding into these private schools, like where I send my kids, and they're going to say, well, you don't want to lose the children that are on the voucher funding, do you? You don't want to lose them. And so you're going to do what we tell you to, just like you did with the COVID mandate. And that's how we see this working down the road. And that's how government always works. Once they get their foot in the door, the program doesn't shrink, it grows. And for all these Republicans who think that, a welfare and a program, an entitlement program is the solution, I mean, that's not limited. It's a welfare program. It's growing government. It's eventually going to lead to increases in taxes. And ultimately, it's monopolizing education. Yeah. We give the example in our area because we have the largest healthcare monopoly in the country here. And it was a Republican-created monopoly where you had our legislators out this way who changed the law to allow for the merger of two healthcare systems. And what happened was that now all the healthcare choices are now, they're government controlled. You have no options outside of what the government has to offer for healthcare here. And you have to apply to the government to get a certificate of need to build your own healthcare facility, and you can be lobbied against by the monopoly. So we look at this as the same. Now you're talking about, right now we have homeschool, we have private schools, and we have public schools. But what you're talking about now is you're going to have all government regulated schools.
Question.
So it's a monopoly.
You said that you already send your kids to a private school. So aren't there state standards that already apply to private schools? I thought they already had to meet certain criteria.
Well, we don't have to submit our test results. So, I mean, in this legislation, now they're talking about, we're going to have you all submit your test results to the state. We don't have to do that right now. But as a condition of receiving this funding, you will have to do that. And so, we can look at who all is involved. And Karen Bracken, who Dave knows well, she leads Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty. And she put out an email recently that talks about UNESCO's involvement in this. And UNESCO is the United Nations Education, Science, and what's the C there?
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it's culture organization. Yeah. And so when you really look back in time at what this program is, it's about trying to it's the No Child Left Behind, and they want them all to adopt this UN world belief system. And so that's really what this is. And so when they can get their feet in the doors of private schools, and then they can start to have this surveillance and these records and be able to data track and data mine the kids that are in those schools, that's allowing them that entry point to being able to do that.
Yeah, no child left alone now, right?
No child not tracked and surveilled and accounted for. And so, that's not what we want. I don't want my kids to be tracked and a part of this surveillance. And so, that was, I wrote an open letter to Governor Lee, and I wrote that right after the Attorney General Scarametti was doing the hearings about the gender mutilation surgeries, right. And he was saying we shouldn't be doing that. And I said, Bill Lee, it's great that you're looking to protect children, but what you're doing with the voucher program is not protecting children. You're going to be harming them through this program. And, pointed to some of the downfalls that we're looking at when it comes to this. And it's not the real solutions. I mean, we could instead look to restore traditional values, principles of morality, faith, law, liberty. Why can't Tennessee and the Bible Belt be doing that in the public schools? You have Texas doing that. You have Oklahoma who's doing that, putting 10 Commandments back on the walls. And why can't they, focus on fixing public schools by returning them to that pre-1960s humanist values, where you had Dewey, Potter, Huxley, and the First Humanist Society of New York, who they ended up getting Bibles out of schools. And they put their evolutionary humanism in. So get that out and put these principles back in. We could elect, not appoint, the education commissioner.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
do I think we would have elected Lizette Gonzalez if it was left up to the public? No, I don't think we would
We
have.
wouldn't have elected Penny Schwinn. And the legislature had a lot of problems with her as well. And the other day I actually was listening to the radio, and the question was asked, and Bill Lee was being interviewed, and he was asked if he made the recommendation for Penny Schwinn. He said, well, no, I didn't recommend her, but when they called me to ask her about her, I said she was great and that she was a good conservative. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you are either that delusional or that devious, one of the two. For anybody to think that Penny Schwinn, he actually said she was a conservative. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But a couple things here, though. This legislation, as I understand it, 65% of the funding is going to go to people who already have kids in private school. 35 is going to go to those who have kids in public school and want to go to private school. So it sounds to me more like a subsidy for the ones who already have kids in private school. And then here's another thing. A question was asked, well, okay, what if if your kid is in a public school, and let's say there's another school that, it's not in your district, but it's a good school, and you want to take your kid to that public school. Can we use the money for that? And this Senator Johnson was asked that question. He said, no, we cannot do that, at least not at this time. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I thought the whole goal was competition. So if the whole goal is competition, wouldn't that be one of the, and especially if you wanted to improve the public schools overall, wouldn't that be one of the first things you would do, is to allow people to go to different districts? Now, they're allowed to go, but they have to pay right now. When you go to a school out of your district, you have to pay. I have no idea what the cost is. It probably varies across the state. But if you're going to start a program and create vouchers for people, why would they not be allowed to use those vouchers to pay to go to another school? And I may have already mentioned this, but for this special session, the Sycamore Institute put out an estimate of what everything was going to cost just for the special session. Well, I say everything, that's not quite accurate, because it did not include, and it made it clear, it did not include whatever the cost come to for the immigration enforcement. Just with the vouchers and just with the disaster relief, $917 million. Yeah. With the bulk of that coming from the vouchers.
Yeah, Gary Humble put out a tweet on Twitter, and he said, interesting new report from Sycamore, Tennessee on the cost of Governor Bill Lee's special session. And he said, take note, ESAs will create $225 million in new recurring expenses. He said 2025 and 2026 estimate growth in new recurring revenue at approximately $377 million annually. So the takeaway is ESAs alone will consume 60% of the state's estimated new recurring revenue annually. 60%.
That's crazy. Any other thoughts on vouchers and any other?
I mean, that's fiscally conservative, right? That's fiscally conservative there. I mean, my prayer is that this isn't going to go through, because when we look at what happened in England and Western Europe after they were implemented post-World War II, in all cases, private and religious schools lost their religious distinctions. Canada's Alberta province, like I said, gave Christian schools a choice: quit being Christian or lose your funding. Right. And I look at what happened in the 1960s. So Christians didn't stand up then. Republicans didn't stand up then. They let Bibles get taken out of schools. Bibles are the most referenced document in the creation of our Constitution. And our laws come from it. You have, right to confront your accuser comes from the Bible. You have laws, things like due process, that comes from the Bible. And yet we took out that basis for our entire system of morality and law and our Constitution out of the education system. And then, as General MacArthur said, he said that a country in moral decline will decline economically and into complete destruction unless there's a great spiritual awakening. And so for decades, we had people walking away, and then we wonder why we're at a point where people don't know that marriage should be between a man and a woman, or that there's two genders, men men and women. And that's why, because Republicans and Christians didn't stand up then. And I think that right now we're at that moment right now. We're at that next moment where if we don't stand up against this now, that will be the result. And it might take 10 years, it might take a decade, or it might take 20. But do you want to look like Canada? Do you want to look like Sweden? Do you want to look like Western Europe?
Yep.
I mean, do you want to be socialist? Because I look at it like they're not teaching those things in public schools, but my kids are learning it. My kids know about the dangers of communism, the dangers of socialism, and so schools like theirs and also homeschools are barely keeping us from tipping over into the abyss and looking like Canada. And so, I think that that's the real danger here, is that within a decade or two, you'll have gotten God out of all schooling. And that's a step to communism. It's one of the 8 steps. Write out God so government becomes the highest authority. And I think
about half of our country's already there. I mean, we lucked out. I mean, I won't say we lucked out. We were blessed in this last election, okay? But we only got Trump 4 years. Trump alone cannot save the country. And look at all the crazy, insane people that voted for Harris. I mean, he won by a few million, but a few million when in a country of, I don't know, 320 million, 350 million, who knows? It's probably closer to 400 million with all the illegals they've let come over the border. Whatever the number is, we still have a lot of crazy people, and we still have a lot of crazy, insane people in government at all levels and in our universities, in our institutions. So it would not take long. If this election had gone the other way, as cowardly as our states have become, we might have 5 years.
I agree. And I look at this like, if we already had this itself is a welfare program, it's an entitlement program, it grows government. You're talking about, more bureaucracy. You're talking about adding another agency to look over and monitor the private schools. It's going to eventually increase taxes, and it monopolizes education. Those are all not Republican things. Those are all working towards socialism anyways. And you have Republicans who are accepting this.
Yep.
So we're already halfway there. I mean, you're going to take away the last remaining people who understand these ideals.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, hey, we've got the your one-sheet voucher information posted on our website for anybody who wants to look at it. Let's move on to weather modification. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now, I don't know much about weather modification. I've read just a little bit, and you're definitely, at least compared to me, a guru on it. So let's hear it.
Yeah, definitely not a subject matter expert, but because I was already in the freedom realm, and we looked at this as another example of federal overreach, where we could identify that there was a congressional mandate. The federal government had a congressional mandate for solar radiation modification, which is basically experiments in our skies that we have not consented to. Experiments like blocking out the sun. And so we could prove last legislative session, Representative Monty Fritz carried it in the House, and Senator Sutherland carried our legislation in the Senate, and it looked to ban these experiments from happening, at least in Tennessee, from banning solar radiation modification, banning cloud seeding, banning solar aerosol injections, basically banning any experiment that's happening in our skies as pertains to weather modification.
Did all those things start at once? Some of those things are older than others, right, as far as the weather modification goes?
Yeah, so I actually have an image here. So there was actually 3 states that had banned weather modification in the 1960s. So there was Maryland, and I have a Maryland law that I gave Gavin. Yep, there you go. And see, I highlighted at the bottom there, it's the second to last paragraph, and it talks about how it was Congress, even back then, and private and public entities who were experimenting. And one of the paragraphs up at the top, it talks about how it was farmers who blew the whistle on it because it was interfering with their crops. And so there was 3 bans at the time. There was Maryland banned weather modification, Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and they were successful at the time. And so this isn't new by any means. It's just that we had reason to be able to point to a current 2022 congressional mandate where we could show the budgets, we could show, and we were able to prove in the Tennessee legislature that this was happening. And so they did try to ban geoengineering, weather modification, and solar radiation modification, but it wasn't successful because, much like a lot of the laws in Tennessee, there was no enforcement mechanism.
Yeah,
They
the T
said,
is for toothless in Tennessee laws,
yeah.
unfortunately.
So they said, there's basically that if we add a fiscal note to it, so if there's an enforcement mechanism, it's going to carry a fiscal note, and then it's going to get put behind the governor's budget, and it's not going to get through. So we took it as a first step. But then after that, TDEC is who it was given to. So the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation was who this ban was given to. And TDEC came out saying, we can't do anything about this because it's FAA and it's the EPA, it's their jurisdiction. And so they're like, well, we can't do anything.
We have no control over our own skies.
We have no control over our own skies. And that was always our argument. We're like, this is a 10th Amendment issue. And we could point to the precedent in law where there have been successful bans in the past. We're just similarly to how we're having this issue with nullification. And we have a real hard time with trying to get nullification through in Tennessee, even though we're supposedly this great Republican state. They don't want to stand up against the federal government. And so we're running into that same thing again. And so Representative Fritz, he's been trying to figure out, how is a way that we can make this ban successful. He's met with the Attorney General. He said, I really want to expand upon this legislation. How can I do this successfully? And to be honest, at this point, I think it's going to take a lawsuit. There's actually a lot more groups right now who are pushing across the country. And I don't know if that's something we can get our Attorney General to do, because we don't have a Freedom Caucus in Tennessee. Nope. And our Attorney General, although he's been bold in some things, he hasn't been in others. And one of the issues that we have in Tennessee is that we liked to take that climate funding. Everyone's saying that, Biden's climate scam, the Inflation Reduction Act, all the Tennessee Republicans acknowledge that's a climate scam, but that didn't stop us from taking that federal funding.
And if you doubt it, look on our state pages. If you look at our state website, and you'll see where we've adopted the Biden climate model. I wonder how long that'll stay up now that Trump is in office.
That's a good point, because some of the things have already started to come down. But so, for instance, when it came to that climate scam and attorney generals going after the EPA, they basically tried to sue the EPA saying, we don't want to have to implement all these net zero emissions plans. This is going to be harmful. But Tennessee was one of the last ones to sign on to that litigation because we were accepting the climate scam funding. Yeah. So we definitely didn't lead the charge on that. And TDEC, who's supposed to be over this ban, they were saying that we want to be the epicenter for the electric vehicle exchange or transition. And as they, take that money and install electric vehicle charging stations everywhere, even though only 0.9% of Tennesseans have electric vehicles. So, TDEC hasn't exactly been very helpful. They're basically just following whatever the EPA wants. And so, do I think that we'll get Attorney General Scarametti to possibly sue the federal government and say, what you're currently doing is in violation? So I should backtrack. There are current Clean Air acts. There's a federal Clean Air Act, and there's a state version of that. And I would say that they're in violation of the Federal Clean Air Act.
Whoa, wait a minute. How can we have a state Clean Air Act if we can't regulate our air? How can we have both of those things at the same time?
Well, that's my question too. And I think that a lawsuit should happen because I believe the federal government to be in violation of the Clean Air Act. And So recently, there was ICANN is the Informed Consent Action Network. Tucker Carlson just recently had Aaron Siri. He's an amazing lawyer, and he had him on his show, and they were talking about vaccines. But recently on the High Wire, the Informed Consent Action Network, his legal firm, they were FOIA requesting the EPA around geoengineering and weather modification. And the EPA admitted, yeah, we know about it. We're actually, participants in this program. And yeah, we know that the chemicals that are being used to block out the sun with solar radiation modification, we recognize that these chemicals are harmful. So you have a Clean Air Act, which is supposed to prohibit harmful chemicals
Unless the
from,
government does it. If the government
yeah.
does it, it's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where I think ultimately we're at a point where we're going to need some attorney generals from some states that have freedom caucuses to bring this up and say, you're supposed to be in charge of the FAA, you're supposed to be in charge of the EPA, and yet you're allowing for chemicals that you have even said in a FOIA request you understand are harmful to be sprayed on Americans. And, I think that's where we're at with it. There's a group that it's a global group, but there's a whole lot of people who are on this issue now. And there's going to be a lot more legislation that's entered in a lot of states. And we'll see if maybe some of these other states are more successful than Tennessee has been. But I think it's at a point where there's going to have to be some lawsuits, and we're going to have to start suing the EPA. And not only that, suing the FAA too. Because the FAA, there's this, it's Weather Modification Incorporated. I didn't give Kevin this website, but if you go to weathermodification.com and then you go to aircraft, you can see all the different aircraft that they're approving to use for modification.
What are
And
the
if
chemicals that they use? The aircraft. I mean, what kind of chemicals are they dumping on us?
sulfur dioxide, barium, strontium, there's a host of them. And so we're like, and if you can look up, so the EPA has or they have not toxicology, they have toxic profiles on all of these chemicals that are being used. So it's not, it's not a secret. And like I said, in that FOIA request, the EPA admitted that they know that they're harmful. But that weathermodification.com site, if you scroll down on their aircraft page, it says that the FAA is approving these. It says, our talented team of experienced technicians facilitate the entire process from design to modification to U.S. Federal Aviation Administration standard certification. Weather Modification, Inc. can also perform any necessary maintenance required or upgrades requested by the client during the modification process. So you have the FAA, who's supposed to be, helping ensure these regulations. You have the EPA, who's supposed to be helping ensure these regulations, and they're allowing it. And the New York Times, actually, they did a hit piece on us, on my tiny little group in Northeast Tennessee. So East Tennessee Freedom was mentioned by the New York Times. They said, and this was my response to them, because because the New York Times wouldn't run my letter to the editor where I said, they reached out for comment and I gave them comment. I sent their own articles back to them dating back to 1972. There was a 1972 article that talked about how the U.S. government was cloud seeding over the Viet Cong in order to flood them out of tunnels. And they had another article that was talking about how it's toxic chemicals getting rained down on people. So they've had and now they're switching the narrative to actually weather modification is good because it's combating climate change. So I was like, you've had a bipolar take on this issue since the 70s, and you're gonna do a hit piece on my organization because we don't want to partake in this experiment that you all can't even say is safe. And I mean, how about instead of doing a smear piece on us, we openly debate this issue? We talk about it publicly. And it was funny, the comments that were on there. There was people, and it's a bipartisan issue. I mean, there's people on the left and there's people on the right who don't want to be sprayed with chemicals, who understand that there's consequences to blocking out the sun.
You know, and
And
let me jump in here real quick. I heard, under the Biden administration, is the first time I heard about this idea of blocking out the sun. But does that idiocy precede the recent idiot we had in office? Is that something that they've been doing longer?
yes, so actually, there are several federal laws that we would need to, well, I think the states do need to claim governance like they did in the 1960s bans, and we do have to ban it from a state level because it's just like nullification, where really, the states are supposed to have more authority. The authority is supposed to be decentralized to the states. If it's not in Article 1, Section 8, if it's not listed as the 18 enumerated powers, it's supposed to defer to the 9th and 10th, the people in the states.
Yep.
And so I do think that the states have to claim governance over this, but there's also several federal laws that we should aim to get repealed. And I've sent this, I had the pleasure of meeting Marla Maples recently, who she's really concerned about this. I'm like, can you get this to your ex-husband, to your daughter's father? Can you get this information to him, please? And so he can, push for this to happen. And this is, RFK has said that he's going to stop this as well. But so the several key U.S. federal laws that need to be repealed to end these activities. There's 15 U.S. Code, Chapter 9A, Weather Modification Activities or Attempts Reporting Requirement. There's the National Weather Modification Policy Act of 1976. There's the Global Change Research Act of 1990. There's HR 353, the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act of 2017. And so those were, Trump, unfortunately, he did reauthorize those the first time around, and then Biden reauthorized them. And, Trump he could push for these not to be reauthorized again and to, stop this.
Question on those. Do any of those that you just mentioned, do they require the federal government to contact the state or states that are going to be impacted before they go and do any of this? And how often do they do this?
So there are some states that require reporting, but it hasn't helped. So there are states that require, if they're going to be doing cloud seeding, if it's in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they want more snow on the mountain, and they have a contract to cloud seed because they want more snow. So they do have to report that, but that's not solar radiation modification. That's not all these other ones, marine cloud brightening. That's not SAI. Solar aerosol injection. So there's a lot of things that aren't being reported, and there's a lot of states that aren't reporting it. And the states that do require reporting, it's almost worse because you have California that participates in a lot of this, and they're on fire. I mean, they're burning because also a lot of these chemicals are combustible.
So wait a minute. So you say reporting. My question was, is there an agreement with the federal government that before the federal government is going to come in and do this, cloud seeding, sun blocking, whatever, that they at least notify the state or
I don't believe
ask
so.
the state? And so if there's a report, it's an after the fact, oh, by the way, we just dumped whatever on you in this region.
I don't believe so. I can't say for sure. We only had one person come testify against our legislation. It was this guy. His name's Augustus DeRico. He was from California, and he runs a company called Rainmaker. And he came to testify against it because he was like, well, if I want to make rain in Tennessee, I don't want this law to be banning me from doing that, which it's supposed to be doing. But I'm not sure. I don't know if those make it so that they have to report. I don't think so. I think that probably would have come up in the legislative hearing.
Right.
But yeah, that's a good question.
So what do we know about the the proven health effects of these different practices and these different chemicals?
Aluminum is one of them. We know that aluminum has a toxicity profile. And aluminum there's even a study that shows that it can lead to root shortening in trees. I mean, so it's harmful to not only the people, but to the environment, to our plants, to our crops. And that was referenced in that 1965 Maryland law. I mean, they said it was farmers who were like, it's affecting our crops. Like, we don't want you spraying us anymore.
Do we know if they are they using
A lot of those chemicals.
the same stuff and the same, I guess, toxic toxicity level of what they were using back in the 60s? Are they still using it? Is it all the same?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know that with the solar radiation modification, I do think that there are other chemicals that they weren't using for cloud seeding. So there is more chemicals that are being thrown into the mix now. That's definitely more outside of my knowledge. My husband's actually a chemist, but
Oh,
that
wow.
was yeah. I am not, but yeah. I mean, so there are things that we could do. You know, we could push for Trump to not reauthorize these programs. We could push for a repeal of these programs. I mean, he is doing a lot of repeals and executive orders right now. I mean, can we get this to through him to Congress and Congress, put an end to some of these things? That would be great. And then, I would love to see a brave attorney general take this on and challenge the federal government on the Clean Air Act and, also their ability to do this.
Well, that really won't be ours. I mean, because he believes anything the federal government does, they have the power to do because of the supremacy clause. And, if the court decides it's okay, it's okay. I know a lot of people think he's great. I have a very low opinion of him. Anyway.
Well, I feel similarly for the same reasons. I mean, I came to the summer study for nullification,
Right.
and Briggs was pointing to the Attorney General's opinion,
Yes,
which got ripped to shreds by Joe Wolverton and Jeff Cobble.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Do they know okay, so what is the stated reason? What reason does the government give for doing this? What supposed benefit is there from what they're doing?
They say it's to combat climate change.
All of it?
So, yeah, we gotta cool the planet by blocking out the sun. It's
Was
not
that
gonna
what they were
happen.
saying in the 60s?
That's a good question. I'm not
Because
sure.
I remember hearing this thing about, we're going to have another ice age when I was younger.
Yeah, I think in the 60s, I mean, they were in the 60s, they were that's when the farmers started to blow the whistle on it. And I want to point into there's a on our resources page also there's an awesome William and Mary Law Review, and it goes through the whole history of the governance of weather modification. It's very detailed. It goes through all the laws, all the history. So if you really want to deep dive on this, go to our website, eastnfreedom.com and resources, and you can scroll down to a William and Mary Law Review that goes
Okay.
through the whole history on the United States involvement in these weather modification programs and the state's attempts to govern and all the laws that were implemented throughout. And what's interesting about this is I found this document and thankfully, I downloaded it because when I went back to look for it, I could no longer access it unless I used a private browser. I had to use Brave because if I used a typical browser, the Safari or Google, I couldn't pull it up anymore. And so I was afraid that it was going to go missing permanently. So that's why I hosted it on our website on resources. But yeah, that's for anybody who really wants to deep dive on this and understand the history. It's a great document. And so, when people say things like, oh, it's conspiracy theory, and you have a William and Mary Law Review that you can go through and look at the entire history of it. And it goes back even further than the 60s. I mean, you're talking, it goes back to the late 1800s, early 1900s when they were trying to do certain experiments.
Okay, well, and that was happening here in the late 1800s, early 1900s?
Yep, they were doing, and it wasn't necessarily planes. They were doing other different types of things. Like, you'll have to go read about it. But
Well, I remember hearing the story about the Rainmakers, the Rain Man, the old Lizzie and the Rain Man song. Started, they had a fire going and they were beating drums and whatever, but I didn't know they were actually trying to do anything like that. I never thought anything that far back was taken serious, is what
yeah,
I'm saying.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't pull it up because otherwise I'd read off the earliest experiments to you. Yeah, but it's all on there. So anybody who wants to deep dive on that, go check out that document.
But at least
And
since the 60s, the modern era, at least since the 60s, they've been dropping stuff. So and that may have been to save us from the ice age. So now they're dropping stuff to save us from. Well, now it's just climate change in general, right?
yeah, now it's to cool the planet.
Cool.
They're trying to replicate, the Icelandic volcano eruption. It showed that it had some cooling effects, and so they're like, oh, well, the volcano ash blocked out the sun and it cooled for a while. So how about we block out the sun? I mean, it goes back to that whole humanism that we're teaching in schools. What the definition of that is, they think evolutionary humanism, which is basically that we can control everything, we can progress using technology and science to the point that we can control everything around us, that we can be gods. And so now that's where we found ourselves. We have, geoengineering, we have genetically modifying, we have bioengineering food. We have man trying to create everything in his own image. We have them saying, cows fart, we can't have that. And yeah, and we got to come up with these carbon captured equipment when it's like, well, how about plant some trees? How about that? They're just trying to make everything in a lab instead of, what is God made and organic, and they're not doing it better.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot of good resources about this on your website. I'm sure you got good resources on there about other topics as well. So that's EastTennesseeFreedom.com.
Yes, and I also wanted to I mentioned Joe Wolverton, who spoke at the nullification hearings, and Jeff Cabo. So we're actually going to have Joe Wolverton out to a meeting. He's going to be here. That's the Jeff Cabo one that's up right now. So yeah, we'll have Jeff Cabo out too. But Joe Wolverton, he's going to be here on February 4th. We had a location change to University Parkway Baptist. It's a bigger church, so we'll be able to accommodate more folks.
That's in Johnson City?
That's in Johnson City. That's on February 4th, 6 p.m. The doors open at 5:30. And Joe Wolverton, he is a John Birch Society constitutional scholar. He is going to be talking to us about Make America States Again. So he'll be talking about the importance of decentralized authority and how states really need to start flexing the 10th Amendment and putting the federal government back in their box of Article 1, Section 8.
Yep. He's a great speaker. If you haven't heard him, if you're in that area, if you can get there, he's definitely worth hearing. Now, that's all the way across the state for me, so I won't be making that one, but it would be a great event. I encourage you, if you're in that area, to definitely go to it, as well as Jeff Cobble, if you can get in on his class. What's the date on that?
Yeah, so we have Jeff is actually going to be with us twice in March. So on March 1st, you have the flyer for that one. That one is his Constitution class, Foundations of the American Republic. 3 parts to it: inalienable rights, scope of government, states' rights, and nullification. And that's going to be on a Saturday. And that will be, it's actually going to be 10 to 4. I know I put 10 to 3, but we are going to put a little break in there for food. Yep. And then we're going to have him back for our meeting that following Tuesday, and he's going to be talking about the Federal Reserve. Yeah. And so, yep, 2 times the Jeff, twice the Liberty in March. And yeah, we're really excited to have Joe Wolverton out here and talk to everybody about Make America States Again, because, everybody's going back into that apathy. They're like, oh, I did my duty.
Yeah. Trump's going to fix it all. We can just sit down and wait. Yeah.
Trump's going to fix it all. And our call to action is, well, we didn't get in this mess, in 4 years. This was decades long of allowing for the federal government to grow unconstitutionally.
And to make that point, too, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but all the EOs that Trump is having to do just to undo what Biden did, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, that number right there, and I mean, I don't even know what number we're at right now, but there's no way that you can look at all those different areas that Biden did EOs on and that Trump's having to do them to counter, and look in Article 1, Section 8 and figure out how can the federal government be doing so much when they only have these limited powers. But they take those powers and they expand them, and they just, because the states let them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so, like they call for, and like Karen and you all are Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty are trying to do, nullification would be a way for us to help limit the federal government's power, and we could start rejecting federal funding that comes with state sovereignty eroding strings.
Yep.
That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts?
No, that's it. Just, yeah, thank you, Dave, for having me on. Everybody, if you haven't already done so, call your state reps, call your senators, and say, stand against these vouchers. They're not limited. They monopolize education. They grow government. They're eventually going to lead to tax increases. And we're a Republican supermajority, so we should be standing against those types of things. And, if they can't fix the education system that they're already over, they can't promise that they're not going to break the private education systems once they get involved. And that's a concern.
Yeah. One thing real quick. So you did say that Representative Fritz, Monty Fritz, he's been on this show a couple times. He's one of the best ones up there. He is working on a bill with teeth. And you say he's talking, I guess, with the AG to see what he could put in there that the AG wouldn't come out against?
Well, yeah, he was supposed to be meeting with the Attorney General this week. I'm not sure how that conversation is going to go. I mean, like I said, I don't know that I have huge hopes for us getting teeth added. I wish I could say differently, because that was our hope. We hoped last legislative session, we were like, okay, well, if we can't get enforcement added because it's going to carry a fiscal note and get it killed, we'll come back next legislative session. But, when you have TDEC saying they're not going to enforce it, and then so even if we did put an enforcement mechanism on it, are they not going to enforce it? And we wanted to do what the 1965 precedent did, which was give it to law enforcement, give it to sheriffs, and have them help enforce. If TDEC isn't going to do it because they're beholden to the EPA, look to the precedent in law and do what they did that worked in the 1960s. But we gave Monty all of our suggested revisions for the legislation, and once he gets a draft, he's going to send it my way. I haven't seen it, but I know that it did go to TDEC.
Well, have him maybe just a thought is, okay, TDEC, how much would it cost you to enforce this? And let TDEC give you some wild number. Oh, it'll cost. Okay, well, you know what? We are the legislature. We pass the laws. You enforce them. So if you're not going to enforce them, we're just going to deduct this from your budget. How about that?
Yeah. That's the way we can do it. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, all these little agencies that are supposed to be, the legislature is supposed to be the most powerful, not agencies, not the AG, not the governor. It's supposed to be the people, the legislature that represents us. But anyway, it's frustrating. Hey, I really appreciate what you do. Looks like you've got a great group there with East Tennessee Freedom. You got great information, and I know you guys are going to be up in Nashville quite a bit this coming session. And you do have an Instagram page as well, correct?
We do. So we have our website. There's easttnfreedom.com. We're also on Facebook. We just started a public page, but we have a private group that you can request to join. And then we do have an Instagram. So we have an East Tennessee Freedom Instagram, but we also started a Zero Geoengineering TN Instagram last legislative session when we were championing that legislation. So you can follow both of those and keep up with what's going on.
All right. Well, hey, once again, thanks for all you do, and I appreciate you coming on. You take care, and we'll see you soon somewhere at an event, I'm sure. I do have some event announcements and information about our guests next week in just a few minutes. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeart, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, tninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Danny Blitz, the White County leader for TNCS SETS, that's Tennessee Citizens for State Sovereignty, will be speaking at the monthly TRA meeting, that's Tennessee Republican Assembly, Saturday, February the 8th from 9:30 to 11 at Champy's Chicken, 1290 Northwest Broad Street in Murfreesboro. She will be talking, of course, about state sovereignty and nullification. Visit TNCSS for more information on nullification. You can also, on the TNCSS website, find petitions that you can sign or that you can download to get as many people to sign on and let your legislators know that you want the nullification process legislation passed this session. Our guest next week will be David Seal from Jefferson County. He's been very involved with the issue of property rights and eminent domain over the years. He will be here to tell us about the latest threat to our property rights and legislations designed to stop it. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.